it's me, Zombie. Today I am continuing to work on my Soul Survivor costume from Fallout 4.
I put this costume together in 3 days for New York Comic Con. I know it seems like a crazy deadline, but I love the challenge. I started this project by sketching some patterns. I usually just fold a piece of paper in half and draw half of my shape onto it. If the shape of the piece is simple, like my knee or shin armor for example, I just hold the paper up to myself to make sure it's the right size before cutting it out. Since all the pieces of the armor on this costume are relatively simple shapes, I was able to use this patterning technique for all of my parts. If there were any details within a particular armor piece, I drew those on too. This helped me visualize what layers I needed to add on top of my shapes and where my studs needed to go. To reduce the cost of the costume, I decided to use EVA foam instead of real leather. But don't worry, with some extra elbow grease, these pieces will look like leather in no time. For my base pieces, I traced my patterns onto 10mm foam with a silver Sharpie. Then I used my utility knife to cut them out. I used a stone sanding attachment on my rotary tool to round out all of my foam edges. This step really made a big difference in making these parts look neater and more organic. To get rid of the little fuzzies that sometimes get left behind by using a rotary tool, I use my heat gun to seal the edges and get rid of that foam fuzz. Now it's time to reuse those patterns. Remember those details that I drew onto my patterns earlier? Now I'm cutting those out and tracing them onto 6mm foam. I repeated the same process of rounding out those edges, and then I glued the details onto my base pieces. I used puffy paint and added some quick and easy faux stitch lines to the chest piece, and used my heat gun to open up my cut and stitch details around the middle of the chest as well. For my shoulder pieces, I needed to add some details to make it look like hardware was attached to it. I used some foam dowels and cut them into discs and used them to make those washer-looking parts. For the bolt pieces, I cut different sized pieces of foam with my utility knife and stuck them right on top of my washer pieces. Now I'm going to attach all those studs. I love using googly eyes as studs because they're lightweight and easy to use. They come in a bunch of different sizes, which was really useful for this build. I used super glue and attached all of my studs to my armor. There were some grommet details on the front of the chest piece. I just used half of a grommet set and pressed them on the front of my chest piece with a little bit of super glue. Luckily, these little grommet pieces have little spikes on the back that really press nicely into foam. After construction, I sealed my pieces with Plastidip and then painted them. I decided on a Krylon brand satin finish spray paint in a caramel brown. I applied 3 layers of paint before I was satisfied with the coverage. I only ended up using 2 cans of this paint, which only cost me about $8. And now it's time for the fun part. I booted up my air compressor and went in with a lighter brown color. My goal here was to create some interesting highlights. I also used reference pictures from the studded leather armor as an aid for knowing what highlights needed to go where. Next, I used black paint in my airbrush for some shadows and repeated the same painting process on every piece of armor. I sprayed some chrome spray paint into a cup and used a small brush to paint all of my studs and grommets. Fortunately, this step only required 1 layer of paint. I like how they turned out, but they're too clean, so let's fix that. I mixed up some burnt sienna and chocolate brown paint and used a smaller brush to paint my rust on my studs, bolts, and other metal bits. To add another layer of dirt, I used a chip brush with some black paint and dry brushed some edges on my leather armor. On other pieces, I did a black acrylic paint wash. I did this by mixing black acrylic paint and water together to form a painty, watery mixture. I then covered the entire piece with the mixture, and then dabbed away paint with a paper towel. This is an easy way to get a dirty, grimy effect. You can also add layers of dirt using this technique. For the belts that were needed on this costume, I ended up finding some $3 a piece belts that I found at my local thrift shop. I hammered some studs into them with my mallet. I then added silver onto the buckle by using some silver leaf rub and buff. I added some more detail onto the chest and back pieces by drilling holes into the middle of my grommet details. Then I used some leftover suede lace that I had from my Aloy cosplay and strung them through the holes in a crisscross pattern. For my armor strapping, I used industrial Velcro and elastic. When I attach the elastic, I like to sandwich it in between my armor and another piece of foam with hot glue. This reinforces the piece and makes it more sturdy. Due to the 3-day time constraint, I decided to order a vault suit on Amazon Prime, and I was pretty pleased with it. One thing I found is that the crotch seam isn't that strong, but if you reinforce it with a stretch stitch with a sewing machine, you should be just fine. This vault suit right out of the box was a tad too clean, so I used my airbrush to weather it so it fit with the rest of my costume. I recycled some army surplus pouches I had and gave them the same airbrush treatment. I even found an unused surplus canteen that I cleaned and painted silver. And I made a shish kebab prop as well. If you're interested in how I made it, I'll link the video right down below. I completed the look with a wig, headband, and some old boots I had in my garage. I decided to go with a retro makeup look, and ta-da! Here is my Soul Survivor cosplay. I like this costume because it's comfortable and it has a lot of pockets. As a bonus, it even has a functional water bottle. I would also love to hear what you're making this week. Hearing about your projects really makes my day. If you liked the video, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. See you next time, everyone. Bye!